So the past few weeks, I've been taking my daughter to swim lessons, and I noticed two different types of students in swim lessons. Those who were more comfortable with the water, or at least willing to take risk, or more comfortable or more trusting of their instructors, and those who were afraid. And I noticed what fear did to their body. So one of the skill sets that they have to acquire before moving to the next level in the initial class is the ability to float on their back unassisted. And so the way the instructor starts them off, they come to the edge of the pool, they get the student whose back is facing them, and they have the student rest their head on their shoulder. And then they push off into the water. And so they're leaning back, and they help them to position their body where they're laying in float position. And once the instructor sees that that they're trusting and they're resting in the water, their body is positioned appropriately, they'll ease their head from their shoulder and cup the student's head with the palm of their hand. And as the student is leaning into that position and trusting the hold, trusting the position, the instructor slowly moves their hand so that the student can float independently. And now there are two types of students. Either the students that lean back into their rest on their shoulder and trust the hold and trust the release. And then I've seen those whose bodies are tense and they can't lean fully back, or want to sit up, jolt themselves up when they realize that their instructor is pulling their hand away, not trusting the process, trusting the instructor, trusting the position of their body to float in the water, trusting the context and the circumstance that the instructor has allowed them to be in, trusting that it's conducive that they float. And I was just thinking about that, earlier today, as I think about my current walk with the Lord, and surrendering, to the season of life that He has me in, that He's allowed me to be in, the process, trusting that His desire is that I be free, that I be able to float, that I not only survive but thrive, right? Trusting Him enough to rest, to release myself into the position He has me in, to release my body, rest my weight, on His hold, on His grip, and trust even when I feel or I sense a releasing, instead of tensing up, causing my body to sink, And so as I think about that, and I think about one of the verses that was the morning verse the other day, I believe it's Psalms 127. I'm going to try to find it really quickly. But just thinking about the requirement of trust and living a life that's surrendered to God's will, God's plan, process, living a life that is not ridden with anxiety or tense with frustrations, this fighting against, process, or time or seasons, but to be able to rest in and trust the instructor's grip, to trust the instructor's instructions, to trust where God has me, And so Psalms 127, verse 1 and 2 says, unless the Lord builds a house, the work of the house of the builders is useless. Unless the Lord protects the city, guarding it with sentries will do no good. It is useless for you to work so hard from early morning until late night, anxiously working for food to eat, for God gives rest to His loved ones. So just chewing on that verse, just thinking about the scenario of what it takes to float, to learn to float in the water. I realize that I'm tensing up at times, wanting to be able to float, wanting to be able to swim, wanting to be able to not fear the water. And at the very same time, resistant to relaxing in the position that He has me in, to relaxing in the context, in the season that He has me in. And so another thought that came to mind, I was listening to a podcast by Crystal Hurst, And one of the things she was talking about like living a life of overflow, if I'm not mistaken. And she talked about doing away with the excuses of like not having enough time, not having enough energy, or all the things that pull on us and would seemingly keep us from living the abundant life that God has for us, or living into the dreams and the visions that we have. And there is truth in needing to have discernment of, the times and season. Is it time to start that thing right now? Discernment on like what needs to be the priority. And at the very same time, one of the things that she lifted that I appreciate was this notion of living within the margins. So now when I talk about margin, I'm talking about needing margin, needing white space, needing buffer to recalibrate, kind of like those pit stops on the track, for NASCAR, the spaces where they have to stop so that they can be in condition, their cars can be in condition to last the duration of the race. That's what I think of when I think of margin. But the way she used margin was slightly different. She talked about a woman with, I can't remember how many children. It was a lot, and her ability to, publish books, during a season of life that most would look and say, I don't think she's going to be able to do it in this season. And when interviewed and asked about how she was able to be so productive, she did it in the cracks. She did it in the margins. And so I just think about that, and I'm like, Lord, if I could just relax into your grip, relax into your care, relax into the position you have me in, the season you have me in, your hold, and maximize the margins. I don't want to complain. I don't want to be frustrated. And neither do I want to sleep on my dreams, or look back years later and was like, Ashley, you left so much on the table, so much potential, so many ideas, so many books, so many, projects that you didn't touch, you didn't do, like the parable of those who buried, the one who was afraid and buried his talent rather than putting it into the market or investing it. I don't want to be that person either. And so it was, what's the balance, of not putting everything on the shelf and not tending to and being a good steward over the gifts, the time, the talents, the ideas, being a good steward over those things that God has given me. And on the other end, pressing so hard and striving to just be so productive or make those things happen or to achieve, that I'm struggling or bent out of shape, or can't see the trees for the forest necessarily. And so I think there's something to be said about living a life of surrender where you're constantly trusting God's presence, trusting His guidance, being still enough, even in the busyness of life, to quiet your insides to just hear. What is it that you would have me to do today? What is the next best thing? What is the next step in front of me that I'm supposed to take care of? And considering the seasons that we're in. Priscilla Shirer, I'm going through her Bible study called One. I think it's called One in the Million is the full title. But it's talking about, the believer living out the abundant life that God had designed. And when she's referring to abundant life, she's not just talking about things or accumulation of money or status, but abundance, like living a life of peace, living a life of joy, living a life of walking out God's purpose for our lives. And so when she was talking, she mentioned a season that she was in when she first had her children, where she just hadn't realized what the season required of her in terms of she had to put away the way she was living life before she was married or before she had kids. It wasn't conducive for that season that she was in. So I think many things are important. I think it's important to understand the season that you're in and what that season requires. I think it's important to realize the agency that we have and walk out the gifts and talents and the vision, the ideas that He's given us, that He's allowed to be in us. But also not to strive so much and muscle it within our own power and our own effort and forget that it's in Him that we live and move and have our being. And that nothing is going to be built sufficiently or last without his help, and so with that, the only thing left to do is to relax in his care, relax in his timing, relax in his promptings, trust him enough to guide and to lead, trust him enough to know that he wants us to fulfill his will. He wants us to live the abundant life and live out the gifts and talents and the purposes that he has put in us. So right now in this surrendered walk, I am holding these notions and processing them and trying to walk in step with the information, the revelation, the wisdom that he's imparting to me, figuring out what that looks like practically. I'm in a season of motherhood. I am a wife. I am a daughter. I am a sister. And those things are important and invaluable. I am a leader in my profession. I am a writer. I am an artist. I am a creative. But right now, what I'm having to do is entrust all of me, those ideas, those dreams, my cares, my family, to him. To lean on the shoulder of my instructor as he takes me from the edge of the pool into the deeper waters. Trust him, lean into him, trust his keeping, trust his releasing as well. So when it is time to go. So that's where I am. I'm learning to stay close to my instructor, to lean on him, to relax in his hold and in his instructions, to trust his timing, to trust his release. I don't have it all figured out, but I know one thing for sure is that in living a life of surrender, when we continue to seek him, continue to pursue his presence and dwell in his presence, we'll be okay. We'll be okay. So that's where I am. I'm learning to relax in the care, the hold, the time, and the release of my instructor, of my Heavenly Father. And that is okay.